Blue Ridge PBS Echo is pleased to partner with Virtual Virginia and VISTI, the Virginia Society for Technology in Education, to share recordings of the VIBE Professional Development webinars. VIBE stands for Virginia is into Blended Education, and these workshops are delivered via the Virtual Virginia Professional Learning Platform. If you'd like to learn more, contact your division technology leaders to find out how to enroll in courses that delve deeper into the principles contained in these videos.
Welcome, everybody. We thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here on a Thursday afternoon. At a very busy time of year, I'm sure, for you all as it is for us as well. But we are delighted to have Keith Claassen with us today. Keith, I'm going to introduce you by, I'm sneaking over to your Twitter. I love this. I love the details on Keith's Twitter. He is Claassen the man, not the pickle. Husband, stepdad, dog dad, educator, leader. He's going to be talking with us about using data and how we can use data to enrich learning experiences for our students. So Keith, I think you have power. If you want to share screen and drive, we will keep an eye on the chat and answer questions as we go. But take it away, Keith.
So I'm going to talk today about using student data for meaningful goal setting. And really, I wanted to focus on using the student data. That's kind of the key there. The goal setting, I think as educators, we're used to that. We're good at setting goals, right? We're good at setting them, measuring them, monitoring them. But using the data, the student data that we collect regularly, that intimidates a lot of people. And that's why I wanted to focus on for the next 30 minutes. So I'm going to talk about why you want to adopt a data process. If you haven't already adopted one, in your department, in your building, in your division, whatever level you are at, if you don't have a process for looking at data, I'm going to point out why you want to adopt one. Then I'm going to look at different file types and their strengths, and the one that I prefer when using student data and looking through student data. And then the most powerful tool in your arsenal that you have at your disposal on your computer right now that I find many people do not take advantage of. And I'm going to give you a quick example, and everyone cross your fingers. I hope it works today. And then we're going to talk about some VDOE assessment data that's coming up. 3rd through 8th grade, you've got a curveball this year, and we're going to talk about how we can use that for meaningful goal setting. So first, a quote. Every good presentation starts off with a quote. If you solicit data from students, if you solicit data from staff, you have a moral obligation to use that data to benefit students and staff, the same students and staff that you solicited it from. So you're not using data that you solicited, 3 years ago to inform your decision now. We have the power, we have the capability to use data quickly and efficiently for students in real time, and that is our moral obligation. That trickles down usually in a school structure, a pre-K through 12 structure in what we call a professional learning community. Many of you are in PLCs yourselves. Some of them run differently than, there's no standard. Some focus on different things. What I see is the average PLC will focus on instruction. Are we on pacing? What are we planning? What's the best activity to do for what we're studying coming up? How is our unit need to be tweaked or designed? Then I see PLCs talking about assessments, how to design the test. Is the test aligned? Did we cover everything in the unit before we test kids on, the content? Sometimes behavior, Johnny again, and what's working in your class that's not working in mine. Classroom management type things fall in this category. These are the things that I really see being the focus area in professional learning communities. I don't really see conversations of the data that much though, and in friends that I talk to across the state, because people are intimidated by it. They're scared of it. They don't understand it. It's too complicated. Or we rely just on the platform data and we don't look at the raw data and manipulate it on our own accord. So why you should adopt a data process? The process itself whittles down to like 4 key steps. Florida has a process that they publish. Texas has a process. Harvard has a really nice process, the DataWise process that they publish. They even have a module online that you can go through and be trained in how to do their process. But all of these processes whittle down into 4 key steps. Ask an open-ended question. right? And that's what the PLC can do. They can start by asking a question. Identify your data sources. What pieces of information are going to be relevant for answering that question? Dive into the data, search for that evidence, look for exactly what you're looking for, and weed out all of the rest. And then action steps. What are you going to do about it? You know, data doesn't lie. It's black and white. It's there. It's on paper. And you know, if you can sift out all of the stuff that clouds what you're looking for to answer your question, it's actually very powerful. In your PLC groups, data should be a type of PLC group that's the center of discussion for the entire PLC meeting. You're talking about your data for an extended period of time. And you should purposefully select data for that meeting that will promote the most productive discussion, so people don't, you know, squirrel off and go on tangents and get lost on a factoid that's not relevant. So if you can whittle down that process to select the data points that are most critical to discuss, you know, the people in the discussion will be focused and be confident and come to the meeting prepared. And then the third point, that structured dialogue format for group discussions. As a teacher, how many of you have ever used sentence starters with your kids, especially in the early childhood or primary age? Those discussions have to be structured, at least in the beginning, until people understand the types of questions, how to respond without being offensive. And that doesn't come naturally. That has to be set up in your norms and in your process for looking at the data, disaggregating the data. And the more clear you are with a structured process, whatever level it is, the 3 people on your planning team, the 20 people in your building, the 600 people in your division, it doesn't matter. The clearer the process, the more structured it is, the more people will adopt it, and it'll run smoothly. And it'll be part of your organization. It'll become part of your culture. And then those discussions will happen when you're not around. So let's look at how simple it is. Asking a question, you know, before you even look at the numbers, before you even, you know, get your data source, identify what you're looking for. You know, are you looking specifically for students with disabilities? And what about them? Are you looking for growth? Are you looking for achievement? Are you looking at benchmark data to track your progression in your, you know, what students are learning through your course? How are you going to disaggregate that? What exactly are you looking for? Because if you don't know what you're looking for, you could click numbers for days and not find anything. Remediation platforms. Several school divisions have platforms that they use. They, you know, throw a kid on a computer and let them click away on their learning path. There's data on the back end that can inform decision-making. It can inform your groups, it can inform your pacing, and we need to look at that. But look at what? Are we looking at the amount of time that the kid is in the platform? Are we looking at how fast they're clicking through? So knowing what you're looking for before you even look at the numbers is really powerful, just to focus attention. And writing it up as an open-ended question allows for that inquiry process to unfold of, you know, you're not just filling out the table to turn into your administrator, to turn into the director, to turn into the superintendent. This is an inquiry process to inform our practice as professionals, so we can understand where our kids are in their learning and what we need to do next. Starting with the question is the most important key. Then you can identify your data sources once the question is clear. And I recommend, you know, multiple data sources. It doesn't have to be 1, it doesn't have to be 20, but pick the ones that are relevant. And with that, you should really establish a primary data point. What is the primary indicator that I am going to measure in my data dig or in my process? What am I looking for, and what's the data point that's going to give it to me? But there's probably some secondary data sources that can provide meaning to that and clarity. And it's not captured in the primary data point, but it explains some things. So for example, your benchmark data might be your primary data point. If my scores are in the 20s, there might be attendance data that can help explain why. If my scores are in the 90s, there might be other data points that can help explain why. And having that other data available just to provide additional insight as you're diving in and helping to answer your questions, it'll give a holistic picture of exactly what you're looking at when you dive into the numbers. Step 3 is the actual search for the evidence. This is actually taking out the data, whatever you decided, your primary source, your secondary sources, and looking at it. And you should really look at it in layers, right? If anyone's ever opened up an Excel sheet filled with thousands of lines of numbers, it's overwhelming. And so you shouldn't try to do everything in one sitting. There should be that initial look. And that initial look at your data is really just looking overall, whether it's pass rates or averages, or if it's a count of how many people did X, Y, Z, you're really just getting that initial bird's eye view, that overview of what is in the data, what is it telling me? You're going to want to compare those. Is there a relationship between them? And then you're going to say, performance bands, how many students are falling into these chunks, into these categories of kids I know solidly they have mastered this content. They are ready to move on. They are ready to go. Kids who are struggling and I need to give a little bit of extra help for. Kids who have not even begun to understand what I'm talking about yet, that I have to work with every single day to help them understand what it is I'm trying to get them to learn. And so you can set performance bands, however your division does it, however your school does it, but make sure they're clearly defined for the process, because I might think in my classroom that 70 is proficient. You might think in your classroom that they're not proficient until 80. And so if we come to the table, we have to have that common understanding of what the performance band is, so we can speak clearly to the percentages, the rates, the counts, the averages, whatever we're looking at that falls into that band. Are there any data outliers? And outliers are critical. There are statistical methods for identifying if a number is an outlier or not. Most people I know just wing it and say, well, that number's kind of out there or whatever. All the other numbers are around 70. This number's around 30. It's an outlier. So are there any outliers that are skewing your data where you may not want to do an average? You might want to look at another measure of central tendency that's not affected by an outlier. During that second look at the data, though, this is where you put your thinking caps on and you try to figure out, you're asking the question, why? Why is this occurring? And this is why your secondary data sets that can help inform what you're looking at, this is where they come into play, because they provide meaning, right? And so what trends or patterns are there? Maybe you're looking at benchmark data for 2021, and you're going to compare it to the benchmark data, your secondary data set from 2019. How did we perform 2 years ago during our last normal year? And how are we performing now? What does that tell us? What do you see at a grade level? What do you see as the individual teachers? How did the biology teachers compare to each other? You're really looking at instruction, intervention, remediation programs. Are they being delivered with fidelity so the kid can get the most out of their time with us? And what's the evidence? Like I said, that's where the secondary data sources come into play. Okay. The last step, plan for action. Everyone should walk out of the room knowing there are next steps based on what we just found, and so everyone has a job to do. What are we going to do about it? There's no point in saying, in chemistry, kids have not mastered stoichiometry yet, and not walking out of the room with the next step. What are you going to do about it? What additional supports do you need? Do you need supports from another teacher who has a higher pass rate in that area? Do you need support from your administrator? Do you need a content expert to come in and help you with supports, with activities, with evidence-based strategies for teaching your content area? And then for the kids who don't have it, how are you going to remediate them as a grade level? What's the plan? How are you going to enrich the ones who do have it so they're not bored to death sitting in our classrooms? What's the plan and what are we going to do about it? I think if divisions do not have a data process in place and you aren't doing these 4 things, you're missing out on opportunity and clarity for your professionals, for your educators to do what they need to do for kids. That's the argument for adopting a data process. I'm going to jump right into the next one with different types of data sets. We are coming out of COVID, And probably everyone on this screen has a Google account. If you didn't before, you probably do now. And you know that's web-based server somewhere in the middle of Nowheresville, USA. It's slow, it's not as functional. It's convenient though, it works great. It works seamlessly. You can share it with everyone and his mama. You can lock cells down, you can put equations in, you can do anything you want, you can force copies. That part is fantastic. But for crunching numbers, it's less functional. It doesn't give you as many options. So I recommend whatever level you're at, that you get your data into the rawest file type that I know of, your comma separated value. Get your data in a CSV file, because that is a common communication between platforms. It rips out all of the information that's not necessary. It's processed well by different applications, and it's flexible. You can do a lot with it. And once you get your data in that format, your goal is to save it as an Excel spreadsheet. This file extension, the XLSX, the Excel file extension, is the most powerful, the easiest way to regroup, to combine information, to format, to sift through data. And so this is the ultimate goal, whether it's a platform, whether it's, I don't know, Pearson SOL data, whether or not it's benchmark data. Ultimately, you want to save your file in this format. And if you can get here, you are going to be a happy camper in a couple minutes when you start pulling your data apart. For my example coming up, you're going to have to understand these 2 points. Quantitative fields versus categorical fields. Quantitative is easy. We start learning this in 3rd grade. Quantitative, numbers, quantity, quantitative. These are important because these numbers represent a value in your data. Achievement value, for example, a growth value is another example. Then there's the categorical stuff, which is ways to sort information. You can sort by race, you can sort by gender, you can sort by grade. These are categories that kids can go in. The thing to be careful of, the tricky part is numbers can be categories too. The number 1 can represent something. It's not always a measurement that you're looking for. Sometimes it's a category. Here's a quick example. If I threw all of these numbers on the slide, just as they are, this would be quantitative. The numbers represent something. I don't know what yet, but they represent something. But if I gave you this, these numbers don't have the same value anymore. They are representing a category. So I have 6 greens in my data set, and that makes it a categorical, even though it's numbers. And if you can understand this, you can follow along the next 10 minutes, what we're going to do when we dive into an example. The most powerful tool in your arsenal on your computer right now, as we are speaking, is a pivot table. The most powerful tool is a pivot table. For the people in the back, it's a pivot table. In case you can't hear me, it's a pivot table. If you don't know how to use a pivot table, you got to learn how to use a pivot table, because all of this stuff you do manually by hand, the equations, the calculations, the filtering, every time you open an Excel sheet, this thing does it for you. It's built in. It's been here for 25 years. It's highly powerful tool. It's the most powerful tool in your arsenal. So the pivot table, what is it? It's a tool to disaggregate data. It rips your data apart. It puts it back together in a nice little table. It gives you exactly what you want in a split second. All you got to do is learn how to drag and drop, know what fields are in your data set, and know how to sort them and filter them. Once you can drag and drop, it'll build it for you. Why you need to know about it? You can extract significant information, the information people want from you, very fast. And it's easy as 1, 2, 3. Select all, click the insert tab, and click pivot table. Click, 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 and then you can start dragging and dropping. And I'm going to give you a live example after this slide right here. After you do that, there are 2 parts to a pivot table. The right part, the areas on the right-hand side, this is your drag and drop area. Drag and drop a variable into a row, it becomes rows. Drag and drop something into a column, it becomes a column. So if my variable is gender, and I have male and female as the categories in that field, if I drag and drop that into column, I'm going to have 2 columns at the top of my pivot report now, male and female. And that is going to appear in something that looks like the left-hand side of the screen. I'm going to have a space for my rows, a place for my columns, a place for my calculations, a place for my filters. And the second I drag and drop and release that, second I take my finger off of the mouse, the table on the left is going to build what I'm looking for. So what I want to do right now, I can't do because I want to give you an example using SOL data, and I'm not allowed to do it. So I'm going to give you an example using a public data set from the Civil Rights Data Collection. They publish large data sets. I'm using the 2015, 2016 for my example. It's a list of all of the LEAs in the data set and a whole bunch of information about students with disabilities by race and by gender. I picked 2015 because it is the smallest data set that was on their website, and these data sets can get very, very large. This is a code book. Every good data set comes with a code book. And I know it's small on your screen. I apologize. You'll get the gist of it. It tells you the column of the Excel sheet, what it is, what the field name is, and what it means. So if I see LEA underscore city, that means that's the district and the city of the district. If I see CJJ in my Excel sheet as the header, it tells me it's a juvenile justice facility. This tells you what these columns mean, because in the data set, which I'm going to pull up right now, we're going to do an example with this data set, which is on my other screen, is an ugly, ugly beast. And if we go to the right, we have 115 columns in this data set with a whole bunch of random numbers. And in this particular data set, we have 17,338 rows. That's a lot of numbers. That's more numbers than most people can crunch in their head. And I'm just going to scroll from left to right for a second. That's a lot of numbers. I mean, I don't know, some of you might be getting dizzy. I'm sorry, because there's a lot of numbers. Let me show you how easy it is. Remember, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. Select all. Go to your insert tab. Click pivot table, and it's going to pop up and say, are you sure? And I'm going to say, okay. On the bottom right-hand corner, I've got my drag and drop. On the left-hand side, I've got my table. It's going to build as I drag and drop. And so I'm going to pick a couple of things from the bottom of this list. I know from looking at my code book that I just put up on the screen a minute ago, this variable that I'm hovering over in green is the total number of male students who are enrolled in distance education. And I want to count them. I want to add them all up. I don't want to count them. I want to add them all up. And I want that information sorted by state. I want to know in every state, what is the sum of the total number of students, male students, who are enrolled in distance education. Some negative numbers are going to pop up. Remember, I talked to you about outliers, things that don't matter. We're going to take them out in a second. I'm going to show you how easy it is. See the filters column over here? I'm going to take the same variable and drag and drop it here as a filter, because I know that in this code book, it told me if they don't have a value, they're going to put a -9 as a placeholder. I read my code book. So when I take out these -9s, the outlier, the thing that's not supposed to be there, all my numbers update immediately. Let's say I wanted to sort them. They're all random numbers. I want to know which one's the smallest, which one's has the most male students, which ones have the least. I can sort this by the total number of male students, least to greatest, all the way down in order in a second. Well, Keith, I don't want it that way. I want the biggest number up top. Okay, well, go back here and descend it now as the total number of males and put the big numbers up top. You know, that's great, but I work in Georgia and I want to know every LEA by name for the state of Georgia. So if I am going to Brantley County, I know that there's only 2 kids. If I'm going to Cartersville City, I know there's 37 males. And I can break it down by LEA, and it does it for every state in just a matter of seconds. Just click, drag every state right here, all the way in your pivot table. You can filter, you can change the columns, you can embed things, which is called nesting, and build a very powerful report very, very quickly. And there's other statistics in the background if you dig into it that will, averages, sums, counts, percents of a category very, very quickly. Where this is relevant for meaningful goal setting, your growth assessments are coming up 3rd through 8th grade, and you are going to get data in August and September on where your kids are right now, walking in the door after COVID. There's power in that data. If you can use that pivot table to switch some data around, get some information out of it. All of your SOL data reports that your STC has access to, you can do the same thing for. Last example, student detail by question has the same record book that tells you what the codes mean, what the fields mean, and it looks like this. Very similar look. And if you look at the bottom, if you look here at U, V, and W, I know it's small on your line. This data file tells you the item descriptor. What's the question that the kid got? What's the skill? Compare and contrast, blah, blah, blah. Sort and order, blah, blah, blah. It tells you the SOL. It tells you if it was a low, medium, or high level question, and it tells you if the kid got it correct or incorrect. So if you have a group of kids, a classroom, a building, a school division, and you're planning for goal setting, why would you not want to know that 100% of kids can answer questions about main idea and detail correctly, but 0% of kids can answer questions about dichotomous keys correctly? I would want to know that. And I use this information to help set goals, meaningful goals with teachers on how they can improve their instruction. So with that, you have a moral obligation as an educator, as a professional, to look at this information immediately, pull it apart, make meaning of it, talk about it, share it with your staff, use it to help students. You have a moral obligation to do that. And the most powerful tool is a pivot table. So with that, some contact information for me. I respond to Twitter pretty easily. Email, might take a day or two. I'm a little slow on that end, but Twitter, I'm active. I'm in Prince Edward. If you want to call the school, if you forget and remember nothing but that guy from Prince Edward, give me a call. Someone will get you to me. And with that, Stephen, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
That was a tour de force, Keith. Thank you so much for that. And I have to say, I've never used a pivot table. And that was, I said, so this is magic, right? This is what, and Karen reminded me of that quote, it's tech basically is magic until sufficiently advanced tech is indistinguishable from magic. But that was fantastic. I really do appreciate it. Want to give you a round of virtual applause. And I wanted to ask, I know you mentioned I actually grabbed the link for it. Harvard's process, their data process, was there another one that you particularly recommend? If someone's brand new, especially most of this group is teachers, if they're teachers wanting to say, well, how can I use something as soon as possible, going right into my school year that's about to start before too long, what would be your one takeaway, your big recommendation?
So Texas, their state agency has a quick and dirty 2-page, what you should do, best practice, the process, step by step. It's a quick and dirty. What I found to be the best is the Harvard one. If you're really serious about changing culture in your building to be more student-centered, I would look at the Harvard stuff, and I think it's a MOOC that they have, an MOOC. I think they have a really good tutorial that you can go through that from A to Z, every question you could have for every stakeholder involved in the process. It's very good.
Yeah, I was just wondering about it because, you talked about that earlier with the obligation to do something with it. And, I think become really good at collecting it, but after that, it kind of trails off. So, and I think there's that gap of okay, we have it, now what do we do with it? And I think back to when the TSIPs went away, some of the basic skills in a spreadsheet kind of went with that and weren't really emphasized. And now that, you put it in this context, people are like, okay, so that's why I need to learn spreadsheets, because they didn't see, necessarily a purpose, an application for their teaching directly with working with students, but in understanding the data they've collected, which is, prevalent now, capturing that. We have this recording today that as a starting point for sharing this out and, spreading the word on your perspectives on this, and then also just that it's not a huge mountain to climb. That is pretty easy to get at if you dedicate some time and to becoming a little more proficient with those tools. So thanks again. Really appreciate it.